Okay, so now we're going to move on to respiration. Okay, so I mentioned respiration, how respiration links into photosynthesis in the photosynthesis tutorial. So if you're a little bit confused where the things are coming from for respiration, go back and have a look at photosynthesis. Okay, so basically respiration is... oh, my phone fell down. Okay. Respiration is basically taking sugars and converting that into cellular energy. Okay, and what is cellular energy? We call that ATP. So we've talked about ATP a little bit before. Basically, you've got your adenosine triphosphate. Tri means 3, so therefore you've got your molecule with 3 phosphates attached to the end of it. That last phosphate is where most of the energy is kept, so that's really high energy bond. And what happens is, when the cell needs energy, it's going to knock off that phosphate and end up as ADP, the uncharged version of ATP. Okay, so basically for the exam you're going to have to know the equation for respiration. So basically we're going to take sugars, so in this case I'm going to say glucose. Okay, so that's a glucose molecule there. For respiration to happen, often you'll either need, so there's 2 types of respiration, there's anaerobic and aerobic respiration. So in this case I'm going to start with aerobic respiration, so we're going to plus oxygen. Okay, and then we're going to end up with water and carbon dioxide. Okay, so I'm going to write that down, make that a little bit clearer. Okay, so respiration comes in 2 different types. Aerobic, I like to think of it as you breathe in the air and the air has oxygen in it, aerobic, and anaerobic. Okay, so aerobic has with oxygen, anaerobic is without oxygen. Okay, so most animals and things use aerobic respiration. Okay, anaerobic, there's some bacteria and things that use anaerobic respiration, and often organisms will use a form of anaerobic respiration, but only for a short period of time. Okay, and the reason that is because aerobic gives you lots of energy, whereas anaerobic doesn't give you that much energy. It'll still give you energy, but often it won't give you that much energy, and also there's quite a lot of byproducts that'll happen that aren't very healthy for the cell. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through aerobic first and then anaerobic, and hopefully see some differences between those two and talk about where they happen. Okay, so first off, aerobic. Okay, so aerobic respiration. This is in the presence of oxygen. Okay, so basically there's 4 different stages to aerobic respiration. Okay, so we've got glycolysis, we've got acetyl-CoA, then we've got the Krebs / citric acid cycle, and then we've got electron transport chain. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, aerobic respiration, basically all of this, the important thing to know about aerobic respiration is the fact that these 2 parts here, you need something called the mitochondria. Okay, so the mitochondria is this kind of jelly bean looking thing that is found in, it's an organelle, it's found in our cells, it's found in all living cells that undergo aerobic respiration. Okay, so people often call the mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, and that's because this is where all the energy, where most of the energy for the cell is kind of produced. Okay, so let's just go through these two first ones. So basically, the glycolysis, that's going to happen in the cytoplasm. So we know what that is because tutorial number 1 described that to us. Okay, acetyl-CoA, basically that's kind of like a random step that's in between glycolysis and Krebs. It's kind of a reaction that has to happen so that the products of glycolysis can move into the Krebs. So I'll talk about that very soon. So this one here is also going to happen in the cytoplasm. Okay, and then we've got the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, which both happen on the mitochondria, but they will happen in different parts. Okay, so this one here, Krebs cycle, is going to happen in what we call the matrix. And the electron transport chain, that's going to jump along the membrane of the cristae membrane. Okay, so let's label these places in here. Okay, so basically here's our mitochondria. Outside of the mitochondria is the cytoplasm. It's the jelly it's kind of chilling in. Okay, so that is where number 1, glycolysis happens. Products of glycolysis then move through the membrane of the mitochondria into the matrix. Also 2's happening kind of as it's going in. 3's happening in the matrix of the mitochondria, so that's Krebs cycle. And then that'll move onto the membrane, which is this thing I've drawn in here. And those are on the folds of the mitochondria, which we call the cristae. I'll label that. Okay, and then 4 is going to happen basically on those membranes. Okay, so mitochondria is really super important for aerobic respiration. So now I'm going to go through each of these different stages and tell you kind of the main parts of what's happening in these stages. I'm not going to tell you everything, but you need to go and have a look at the book and make sure that you've got all the kind of little details. This is very, very broad explanation. Alrighty, so number 1, glycolysis. Okay, so glycolysis actually also will happen in anaerobic respiration, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we're still talking about aerobic respiration, so in the presence of oxygen. Okay, so for glycolysis, basically what happens is we start with some kind of sugar, so let's say glucose. Okay, where's that sugar come from? In animals, it's from our food. Okay, and in plants, it's from the sun through photosynthesis. If you don't know that, go back and have a look at the previous tutorial. Okay, now glucose. Okay, so basically the glucose is going to go through a whole bunch of different steps. Okay, there's going to be products in the middle. You don't need to know the names of all of these products. You basically just need to know that it's a pathway. On each of these arrows is going to be an enzyme. Okay, so that's why enzymes are super important for respiration. You kill the enzymes, basically it's not going to work, because each of these different stages to turn this into this product here needs an enzyme, another enzyme for this, another enzyme for this. And these are all different enzymes, because remember, enzymes are very super specific. Okay, and then you end up with, so you go through all these different stages, and you end up with a molecule of pyruvate, or pyruvic acid. Okay, so that is the end product of glycolysis. That is where glycolysis stops. Okay, so in the process of doing all these reactions, basically you at the start of glycolysis, you basically lose 2 ATP molecules. So forming these products, it uses up some energy. Okay, so you get minus 2 ATP. Okay, but in these products down here, you actually gain 4. Okay, so basically for all of glycolysis, you end up with a total gain of 2 ATP. Alright, okay, so that is glycolysis. So we've gained 2 ATP, alright, and what we've also done is we have yeah, no, that's all we've done so far. Okay, so then what happens is this pyruvate molecule, he's just chilling there, he needs to turn into enzyme. We need a coenzyme A coming in. Yeah, coenzyme A coming in here, and then the product of this is going to feed straight into the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. Alrighty, so this here is step number 2. So basically this enzyme comes in and it turns it into acetyl-CoA. Okay, sorry, so this is the enzyme that's used. This here is what's going to move into Krebs cycle. Okay, so Krebs cycle, it's a cycle, it's just keeps going round and round and round. So basically, similar to glycolysis, you have a whole bunch of different stages. At each arrow, you always have an enzyme. Okay, different enzyme for a different reaction. Okay, so it's going to go around like this. Acetyl-CoA basically will feed in through here. It'll join with something called oxaloacetate, but you don't need to know that. Okay, and it goes through all these different stages, and what happens is, what the point of the Krebs cycle is actually not to produce an end product, because these end products keep going round and round and round. The purpose of the Krebs cycle is to charge up NAD and FADH. So NADH, FADH2. Okay, so these are what we call electron carriers. Okay, so the whole point of the Krebs cycle is to charge up these electron carriers, and basically these electron carriers is what you need for the next stage. Okay, so we've gone through 1, 2, this is stage 3, and you need these electrons to go through into stage 4, which is the electron transport chain, and that's where you need all the electrons to bounce along the membrane and produce ATP. Okay, so in this one we have I've forgotten how many you have. In this one we have 4 NADs and 2 FADHs being charged up. Okay, and you also get 2 ATP, and then this cycle is also where you get the release of carbon dioxide. So that's where what you breathe out is coming from. Alright, so now we've charged up a whole bunch of stuff, okay, and we haven't even got to the point where oxygen comes into play. Okay, so we're still talking about we're still talking about aerobic respiration, but oxygen hasn't come into play yet. Oxygen comes in the electron transport chain. So, oops. Okay, so what we've got here is so pretend like these are kind of like carriers, and they're carrying the electrons. So pretend those are the electrons, FAD. And you can tell they've got electrons on them because they have this extra H. So FAD has an extra H, so FADH2. Okay, so basically they're carrying all these electrons, and what they do is they move from, because this is happening in the matrix, and what happens is these electrons, and some ATP, okay, these electrons on the electron carriers move on into the mitochondrial membranes called the cristae. Okay, and basically they're fed into what we call the electron transport chain. Okay, so I gave you guys a picture of what the electron transport chain looks like. Basically, it's a membrane, so if I draw a membrane, I've got my lipid bilayer, okay, and my little lipid molecules. Okay, so that's what the membrane looks like all the way along. So I'm not going to draw that. I'm just going to go like this. Okay, so that's what it looks like all the way along. And in this membrane, you've got a number of different proteins. Okay, so you're going to have to go back and have a look at those yourself. I'm not going to draw them all here. But basically what happens is the electrons are fed in to these different complexes, okay, and basically they hop over along the membrane through these proteins, okay, bounce, and in the process of doing that, they're transferring the energy across the membrane, and what is also happening is creating an electronegative gradient. Okay, so basically the membrane becomes charged, and the hydrogen ions that are sitting on this inside the membrane space, they start to kind of move over to the other side of the membrane. Okay, so what you end up with is a high concentration of hydrogen ions on one side and a lower concentration on the other side. So we know from diffusion and osmosis that when you've got an imbalance, when you've got a high concentration versus a low concentration of ions, they're going to want to come back eventually. Okay, so basically what happens is the electrons come over, jump, okay, and then they hit complex 3. Okay, let's say it's complex 3. Okay, and here we've got our water. This is where the water comes into play. Basically, sorry, not where the water comes in, where the oxygen comes in. Okay, so basically you've got your oxygen. This is why oxygen is really important, because the hydrogens boing, 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 boing. And because these electron carriers have dumped their electrons, they've now got these hydrogens that are now floating around ready to join onto something. Okay, so they've given up their electrons, so they don't need these extra hydrogens anymore to balance out the molecule. So what happens is the electrons boing, 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 and basically a couple extra electrons jump onto this, this where the oxygen is, and the hydrogens bounce on, and what you end up with is H2O. Okay, so this is why oxygen is really important. So the electrons are bouncing towards the oxygen, okay, because the oxygen comes in and binds to the hydrogen, and then you get water produced. Okay, what also happens is, because there's so many hydrogens on one side of the membrane compared to the other side, they want to come down. Okay, so these proteins are all pumping the hydrogens across as well as the electrons move down the gradient, move down the membrane. Okay, and so you've got this thing called, big protein called ATP synthase. And what it does is it's basically like a turbine, and it allows the hydrogen ions to come back through. Okay, all the way along here, hydrogen ions cannot get back through. They're just being pumped across the membrane by these proteins. Okay, so you got high hydrogens, low hydrogens, so the hydrogens naturally just stream in here, really want to get down to the other side, okay, to even out the membrane. Okay, and what happens is that streaming, and this is where you get a whole bunch of ATP being produced. Okay, so that's, you get about 38 ATP, because the energy that's used to spin these turbine things, the hydrogens rush down, that creates a whole bunch of energy, and that energy is captured because a whole bunch of ADPs come along and get charged up, using the energy from that to add a phosphate onto them, and you get a whole bunch of ATPs being produced. So you end up with 38 ATPs being produced for the total process, and 4 of them have come from the glycolysis and the Krebs. Cool. My God, that's a lot of information. Alright.